sustainability. I'm our associate director. And so part of my work is being, part of our team's larger efforts to make the university itself more sustainable. And that includes in terms of thinking about our carbon emissions and other things that have an impact on the climate and the planet in other ways as well. And then I focus also specifically on our work that is support for faculty on the academic side of the institute. At the point is in academia. But then it was actually at a conference, a professional conference in the first year of my position, where I went to a panel that was really wanting to focus on facing a range of possible futures, some of them very, very dark. And it hit me incredibly hard to, and to be putting kind of dates on things that would be impacting people I care very much about, my nibblings and other folks, a generation or two on from me. And that was kind of the real crisis I had actually after starting the position of just going, oh my gosh, this is sooner and more scary than I even thought it was. And so yeah, terror and sadness were probably my initial emotions. And that actually prompted me then to go, oh, okay, I need to do something. And so some of that was looking at Project Drawdown, which has done sort of the research on which solutions are most impactful and, what solutions are out there and how we should be prioritizing them or thinking about them. And also thinking about them as a holistic map, not just do number one, then number two kind of a thing. So Drawdown is one. And then Catherine Hayhoe, the climate scientist, who is herself a climate scientist, but also an amazing communicator about how to reach out to people, how to have conversations, why it's important to stay motivated, what the stakes are and why there's still reason to keep working on the big touchdown. And then I know we're going to touch on her at the end, but then that's also led me to Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's work. Again, how much she's become a public intellectual and not only a marine biologist and climate scientist.
Inspiration for what you're working on now? And was there anyone who helped you along that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially when it hit me so dramatically, and it wasn't like I was just sad for a day or something like that and it went away, right? It was like very profound. And again, it's having transitioned into a new career, it felt like, oh, I actually need to get educated and focused on this subject. And so I started looking for, thinking like, surely I'm not the only one, what resources are available in the world. And the first one I found that was profoundly useful was an organization called the Good Grief Network. And they have set up a 10-step program for processing the complicated and thorny perspectives and emotions related to. That was kind of the first one. And then from there, that actually led me to a real passion for thinking about the mental health and wellness impacts of the climate crisis. Obviously, I'm sure you know of the data of young people in particular and how profound the impacts are sort of mentally and emotionally. And so then that just kind of opened up a whole can of worms of a range of thinkers who are doing a range of work, both on thinking about how action helps people, how community helps people, the real shift I've seen in the psychological profession away from telling people that their anxiety is just anxiety and they shouldn't probably worry so much to acknowledging that these are real griefs, real fears, real anger, and that there's legitimate reasons to feel that way. So yeah, that kind of getting to the Good Grief Network was kind of my gateway into this whole broader world of people thinking about kind of complex piece of that. And then the other part is, I would say, my work with students and with peers, other faculty and staff who work with students on thinking about, not just thinking about, but like learning and then putting into practice supports for students, inspiration for students, trauma-informed education for students. I hear so many young people talk about how they took environmental science in high school or sometimes classes in college. And basically the message they got was like, here's a ton of data, we're all screwed, good luck to you. And trying to really break away from that way of teaching and trying to help people recognize like that to answer it. But yeah, I know I have tried very hard in whenever I teach students or otherwise program for students, and also again like the things that I design for and with my colleagues are really focused on that breaking out of validating all emotions, but breaking out of the stasis of only being able to stay in the most uncomfortable emotions. And then for me, a real passion area has really emerged into also envisioning different possible futures and making space for a range of anybody who wants to be involved in climate work. Another kind of trend I've seen in young people is kind of an assumption that one has to be a scientist in order to be engaged in climate. And while we need scientists engaged in climate 1,000,000% on a range of levels, right? Whether that's research and data gathering to moving into sort of the innovation and engineering kind of space and thinking about solutions and implementing them. We need artists, we need storytellers, we need project managers, we need historians, we need everybody's skills in this fight. And so a big part of what I do too is to try and just get people to see
work that you're doing.
Yeah, to take it back to students, seeing students go on to grad school, to seeing students graduate, seeing students feel excited, dystopian and apocalyptic, and then also kind of really creating space for thinking about people's emotions, and then
Creep back up on you.
Yeah. I think what keeps me motivated are sort of two ways of thinking. The first one is Dr. Catherine Hayhoe has said, she kind of makes this point all the time, that every degree of warming we prevent will save thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives. And so she kind of really pushes back at this all or nothing, we did it or we didn't do it kind of thinking, right? It's like, no. We are already failing, and we also still have time to succeed to some extent, right? And so it's like getting rid of this kind of black and white thinking, and maybe that kind of just goes hand in hand with the larger picture too, to answer your question. So keeping that piece in mind, right? That even if we don't get it perfect, that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. And then the other part is kind of a mindset I've just settled on for myself, which is that I would rather go out having tried. I would rather have been a person who tried than who didn't. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but I still would rather have been a person who tried. And then to, kind of what I do at this point, I do have a range of practices and habits that can help me kind of get resettled and reoriented. And so some of that is acknowledging emotions and then finding ways to move them productively as opposed to stuffing them or ignoring them, things like that. Things like meditation, body, dancing, hiking, being outside, and even just communing with nature, even if it's not particularly active, I think is really valuable to me. When I sometimes hear one side of the discourse, it can feel really overwhelming, and I can then go back to the touchstone authors and thinkers who really do ground me and bring me back into it. So to kind of add to some of the people I've already mentioned, I would say Adrienne Maree Brown. I'm such a huge fangirl of hers, and will just always go to her to kind of like reorient my thinking. Rebecca Solnit, who writes a lot about really active hope, is another one who I can just sort of reground in that perspective when I need to remember that there are alternative ways of thinking and people doing a lot of really, really rich work in the world.
And so when it comes to resiliency, I think it's really important to focus on hope and the future and what a future could possibly look like, especially when a lot of the existing environmental...
Maybe the question, right? And resiliency is such a tricky word because, there's been critique of it in the past several years, and it feels like asking people who already carry heavy burdens to just keep carrying them better. And that's obviously not what we mean by it, right? We do also mean, being able to have the capacity to come through hard times with our hearts and souls intact and our so small. Any action that any single person can take always feels so small.
Yeah.
And so there's a few key things I emphasize. One is that kind of optimistic future envisioning. And I even tell people we don't have to create utopias, but just imagine that we got something right? What does that look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
What's still not perfect, right? Like playing in that sandbox a little bit to just open up our capacity to envision more possibilities or a greater range of possibilities, I think is a really key piece. Some of the other stuff I talked about, right? That, just being able to work with emotions, being able to ground yourself, whether that's individually and community. A lot of people, community is the real nugget, right? It's not being alone with your journal and your sad thoughts, if that's not for you. Going back again to the find your thing. Don't feel like you have to do the thing that everybody says you ought to do, right? Just changing our light bulbs isn't going to be enough. So what's your thing? Find that, do that. And then the other part is maybe the hardest, and it sort of centers on trust, which is that getting more aware of all of the people who are doing good work to solve the climate crisis, who are in the world, and educating yourself, not just on the science, but on this person's working on this person's working on this, and that's the range of this person is designing better solar panels, and this group of people has designed a 10 steps program for people to process their emotions, right? It's that whole range. Yeah. And then you got to do what you do and trust that caring other hearts and souls and bodies are also doing their work, right? And that can be really hard, but I don't think we can do it. Yeah, I think there's an increasing recognition of the role of joy and delight in this work. And so, I think, again, this is going to sound basic, but just noticing a beautiful sunrise, or that the leaves are starting to come in, or spending time at the ocean, kind of that reconnecting to the more than human world, I think is a big joyful climate solution, just in and of itself, even if it sometimes brings up heartbreak or fear about, how those places might be impacted or how those beings might be impacted. It's a really powerful one. I feel like I see people too, just spending more time dancing, telling jokes, sharing food together. Those things that really remind us that we are humans, and that we do this in community with each other. I know that Sunrise Movement has made singing kind of a cornerstone of their practices when they get together, things like that. And then, I feel like I'm seeing actually more stand-up comedy, which about climate change, which I appreciate that shift to being a little irreverent, and letting that complexity come out too in those ways that poke fun at, and let some of that release from laughter come out.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that also just kind of makes it feel a bit more approachable.
Feel your feelings. I think that's such a huge starting point. That's, again, especially in academia and higher ed, even in our kind of Western overculture, is not emphasized. I think we will continue to do less good than we could if we don't start from that place, even when it feels icky and uncomfortable. And I say that as a person who does not come naturally to that mindset, found it out the hard way. But I think it really, really is crucial. And then, I think, so I saw someone earlier today where they said instead of look for the helpers, they were going to be looking for the resistors. And whatever word you choose. And then the other truth is we need resilient people in the climate fight. And so figuring out how to cultivate authentic resilience for yourself and for your community is going to be